I signed up for a MailChimp account. I hired an Indian developer to design our website on Odesk. And I quickly realized over the course of a few months that neither were the right fit for what we were doing.
I was going to ask you about the developer.
Welcome to the Active Marketer Podcast, where we talk about how to design, automate, and scale your business to the next level using sales and marketing automation. You can find out all the tips, tactics, and techniques you need to get more customers and sell more stuff over at theactivemarketer.com. Now, here's your host, Barry Moore.
Welcome back to the Active Marketer Podcast. I'm your host, Barry Moore, and this is episode 7. In this episode, we've got a really great interview with Jake Hauer from FuzedApp.com. Jake is a great entrepreneur and another marketing automation freak like myself. He's got a great story of how he got started down his entrepreneurial journey when he kind of got gifted a developer from Dan Norris, who we talked to in episode 3. Dan was just wrapping up in Sightly and was running out of money, and he couldn't pay some of his staff, so he called up Jake and said, hey, do you want to hire one of my developers? So Jake said yes and took over that developer, and you can hear the rest of the story in the main part of the interview. But before we get to that, the shameless social proof segment where we read out a few iTunes reviews. So we've got a couple more of this episode from the United States. And here's one from Bernard Maxwell, 5 stars. He says, great, quick podcast to get more moves for my business. Keep them coming. I'm subscribed. Well, thanks, Bernard. We really appreciate that. And we'll read out one more here from Donald Bell, who says, 5 stars. Excellent information. I love this podcast. They're short and to the point, and the tips are inspiring. Thanks, you, Donald. That's what I'm aiming for. I really want to give you guys a balance between some inspirational interviews like this week's interview with Jake and some actionable tips that you can take away, some automations you can put into your business straight away. So without any further ado, let's get into this week's episode with Jake Hauer from FuzedApp. All right, so I'd like to welcome Jake Hauer to the show. How are you, Jake?
I'm doing really well. Thanks, Barry. Thanks for having me on. I'm pretty excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to chat with you because I follow a lot of entrepreneurs online, probably a lot of the same people that you do. And there's 2 stories I really love. One is Dan Norris's story about, he's been at the plate swinging in this entrepreneurial game for, I think, about 10 years now, and with kind of mixed success. And then finally he gets onto WP Curve and just hits it out of the park. It's a great story.
Absolutely. I think most entrepreneurs would have a similar story to him. And I think the reason he stands out is because he actually, he lets people into his story. That's not something that I'm very, comfortable doing. But in terms of the lows, he shares a lot more lows than he does highs. And,
yeah, for sure.
People seem to resonate with it, don't they?
It's great to see a success. And the other great story is I think your story is, just a guy slogging away at a travel agent, which is a notoriously low margin, hard work business, and stumble on marketing automation, and then almost over the course of a weekend go from being a retail travel agent to a SaaS app entrepreneur, and largely in part to Dan Norris as well.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting story, and I guess probably the biggest learning out of it is it's actually all about perception.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll talk about Fuzed in a minute, but maybe if we could get back into the time machine and go back a few years when you were working in the travel agency. When you first started, what kind of were you using to kind of manage your list? Was it one of the more basic tools like MailChimp or Aweber or something like that?
Yeah, so I guess I'd probably have a relatively normal evolution into online marketing that probably most of your listeners are going through right now or have been through. So I opened the agency, didn't open the agency. I joined the agency as an owner in 2009. And at that point, I'd only done maybe I'd managed a website build with a local designer at one point for the old agency. So I'd had pretty much no experience in the online space. And so that's exactly what we did. I joined an agency which had been around since the late 1950s. So a very long-standing agency. Our customers had never been marketed to. So my first job was really to get to know our customers, and I thought the best way to do that would have been to start emailing and talking to them. So I signed up for a MailChimp account. I hired an Indian developer to design our website on Odesk, and I quickly realized over the course of a few months that neither were the right fit for what we were doing.
I was going to ask you about the developer.
Absolutely. So I think it would have progressed very similar to what most people do. So I got the developer. He coded up basically or hard coded a custom website, and then I sort of got involved with James Schramko and his community at Superfast Business and learned a little bit more about what you can do on the web and about website building, and realized that WordPress was going to be a lot simpler for us to use. And so I think the next foray was I paid another development company on Odesk to convert the site that we built custom across to WordPress so that we could add new posts, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the next step was from the website evolution was using templates. And so I probably spent, would have been 100 plus hours through this process, and probably $5,000 or $6,000 through the process as well. So quite a substantial amount of money, only to work out that if I'd gotten involved with some people who knew what they were talking about earlier, that I could have done it all on maybe 3 or 4 hours worth of work and $20 to buy a WordPress theme.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, always model your behavior of someone who's actually doing it right to begin with. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think so. Probably the biggest lesson for me there, and it's something that I've taken on through the rest of my business career, has been to find yourself a mentor, and B, find them fast, because they're going to shortcut a lot of the learnings and a lot of expenses and costs. So I think that's probably the big thing that I do now is when I go into something that I don't understand or I don't know, then I'll find someone who does, and I'll pay them whatever they're asking, because invariably they're going to save me money in the long term.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll put a shout out to James Schramko's community as well. I'm a member there, and there's a fantastic amount of value and a lot of really smart people in there as well.
Yeah. So the next thing we did, so I started emailing our customers, and I quickly realized, because they'd never been marketed to before, that they were quite unresponsive, and it wasn't just using email alone wasn't a great way to connect with them. So
are these just straight broadcast emails?
Exactly. Out of MailChimp? Yeah. We were doing like a weekly sort of newsletter type of thing, and it was pretty much what every business does. So it might have even been monthly, to be honest, actually. And one of the trends that was sort of taking place at that time was sort of video. And so I started shooting videos instead of doing just like a newsletter. I'd shoot a quick roundup of all the travel news, and I'd send that out to our customer base weekly. And what I quickly found from that is that I started getting people starting to reply to the email messages with the links to the videos. And I started having people, when I answered the phone and say, "This is Jake," they talk to me like they knew me, like they were my friend, and I didn't have a clue who was on the other end of the line.
Fantastic.
So video really served a great purpose in our agency, in that it really resonated with our customer base, and it allowed me to it allowed them to get to know me without me having to invest in 1,000 individual relationships, which was really powerful.
And I think especially for travel, since it's such a experience-based product, that video sells out really well. Did you put those videos up on YouTube, or did you go straight to Wistia for that?
We started with YouTube, and then it would have just been a referral from that same forum or that same community where Wistia was starting to get popular and starting to talk about it. So I switched across to Wistia. I think I would have been one of the first to switch across to Wistia in that forum for all of my videos, for a couple of reasons. I guess the main one from my perspective was the video sitemap. So at the time, Google was allowing you to, or basically if you had a video embedded on your site in the right format, then it would display a little like thumbnail image in the Google search results. Mm-hmm. And YouTube videos do this automatically, but the problem with YouTube is that they link back to YouTube when I wanted to funnel as much traffic through the video to my site. And so by using Wistia, Wistia was able to format these videos in the right way that they showed in the search results, but they came straight to my site.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. So that was probably the main reason I was using Wistia in place of YouTube, which was against the trend a little bit. But I stayed with Wistia. And I guess the next trend that I saw, and this is all in sort of a matter of 18 months to 2 years. The next trend was a lot of people starting to talk more and more about marketing automation. And so I went off and bought Infusionsoft, and I started doing some basic marketing automation for our travel agency, which was fantastic. It really sort of had a good positive effect on our business. At that point, we were using some CRM and task management platforms to manage our client bookings. And I guess probably the biggest reason I switched to Infusionsoft was that by doing so, I could actually automate some of those, what would I call them, transactional messages that were going to between a consultant and a customer, or importantly, messages that weren't going from a consultant to a customer.
Yeah, very true, very true. So when you looked at Infusionsoft and you started putting that in, what were the very first steps you started taking with that marketing automation?
So the first thing I wanted to do is when I implemented Infusionsoft is I wanted to basically make the exercise cost neutral. So I wanted to find some point in my business which was going to save me the $300 per month that it cost me to have Infusionsoft. And because I hadn't been doing a great deal of sort of marketing automation itself, I worked out that you could actually you could use the tool for some internal business processes. And so the first thing that we did is we looked at our existing booking management process. So, for instance, whenever anybody books a trip with us, there's a few things that have to happen on every booking. So, for instance, they have to pay a deposit, they have to pay final payment, we have to ask them about travel insurance, we have to check that if any visas are required for their country that they're visiting. We also like to check off on a few extra things like airport parking, et cetera, et cetera. At the time, we're also welcoming everybody home with a with a card, et cetera, et cetera. So I took our current task system. We were using a platform called Capsule CRM, which was fantastic. Yeah. But it basically was consultant driven still. So it set the task on the right date, but then the consultant had to manually do that. So we took that, we converted it to Infusionsoft, and then we added in some of these emails or some of these messages that we weren't actually already asking the client. So some really good examples of that is that there are some products in the travel industry that make money, but they don't make enough money that it's worth the consultant actually having that conversation with the client. So, for instance, foreign exchange is a great one because there's a low sort of commission that we get on that. It's about 1 or 2%, and the average order size might be $1,000. So it's like a $10 or $20 commission for us to actually go through that foreign currency conversation. And so if we're talking about how long it would take a consultant to go through and ask that manually, it's just not worth it. But by using Infusionsoft, we're able to automate that message. You put it in a nice email and with some links to the foreign currency platforms, and the traveler is able to go off and order it themselves, and we would get that commission. So a couple of little things like that, airport parking, et cetera, some sort of like pet mining facilities, just a few little things like this, which I guess increase the average order size by between $10 and sort of $60 on a booking. So these are the things that it was fantastic for me to be able to provide a better service to our customers. It was fantastic for our consultants because it was making them more money, and it was actually taking them less time to manage the booking as well. So that alone, that one little sequence, it made us probably $600 a month rather than so it's like $1,200 or something like that, or $1,000. We're making extra, and we're paying $300 to have Infusionsoft.
Yeah, so fantastic. And what I like about your approach as well is that when a lot of people think about marketing automation, they just think, oh, it's just some tool to spam out 1 million email messages to everyone. But you're actually using it to, one, automate your internal task flow, but two, trigger actual human touch points with the customer, 2 weeks from now, I want a reminder to send these people a card or make a follow-up phone call so you can actually do some face-to-face with these people. And that's kind of, I think, the real power of marketing automation is that you can manage your internal task flow a lot easier and convert more customers by reminding yourself to get away from the computer and get on the phone and call them.
Exactly. That's probably one of the biggest things. Well, number one, I think the terminology is just totally the wrong terminology to start with. So marketing automation doesn't actually, I don't think it explains what it is very well. It's actually, for me, it's more sort of business process management or business. It's like a business control system or something else. It's not marketing automation.
Yeah, fair enough.
That word automation, I think, is also incorrect because it leaves negative connotations. The travel industry is a high service industry, as are a lot of industries. Like lots of bricks and mortar is high service, and generally you don't want to be just sending out canned messages and sort of sending out automatic messages to your customers, because they don't always appreciate it. And people sort of, I guess, connect automation with that. Yeah. When realistically, you can hide a lot of that automation behind that sort of layer, that consultant layer or that internal layer. So you can be assigning tasks and sending yourself emails to actually, trigger the conversation with the customer rather than having that email automatically sent if you're not comfortable with that.
Yeah, and moving your customers through a pipeline so you don't you or your consultants don't actually miss a step in the process, and everything.
Exactly.
Everything gets followed up that needs to get followed up. Yeah, I think, you're right. And I think the word automation itself just has a bad rap that it's cold and impersonal, but you're using it to create more of a personal touch with your customers, which is always going to...
That's the important part, I think. I think if you really need to think about there's a couple of questions I ask whenever we do anything in our business. It's number one, does making this change impact our customer in a positive way? Does making this change impact our business in a positive way? So they're the first two questions I ask. If I say yes to number one, we'll do it. If I say yes, if we say no to number one, but we say yes to number two, then I ask myself a third question. Okay, does this impact our customer in a negative way? And if that's a yes, then we don't implement it. But if it's a no, then we'll implement that internal process.
Yeah, fair enough. So there's lots of benefits in getting started with these marketing automation / business management type systems. What do you think stops most people from getting started?
I think the unknown. So number one, I guess the other connotation automation has is that it's going to be complex to set up.
Yeah, for sure.
And so most people are very it's a daunting task to tackle, or the perception. There's that word again. The perception is that it's a daunting task to tackle, and so I think that's what stops most people.
Well, Infusionsoft especially has a bit of a reputation for being Confusionsoft. How long did it take you to kind of get your head around the back end of that product?
I'm a relatively tech savvy guy, but even then it took. I'll tell you what, it took to actually understand the product. It took probably 4 or 5 hours. So not that large of a learning curve to understand how to use, to understand the philosophy around using automation in the business. That was a process that took probably 18 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of training on how you use a platform. There's not a lot of training about why you should be using it and how best to use it. So I think that's the hard part.
Yeah, I guess it's the difference between how do you drive a car mechanically, turn the key and turn the key, step on the pedal, or how do you race a Formula One?
Exactly. That's a very good analogy.
And so I know you've gotten into ActiveCampaign recently over at Fuzed, which we'll talk about in a second. But how do you find the comparison in the learning curve around ActiveCampaign?
It's actually pretty similar, realistically, because again, I think it does really. It matters less about the platform and more about what you're using it for. So, and what you're using it for is agnostic, regardless of if you're using ActiveCampaign, Infusionsoft, Ontraport. So, I think it's probably best to understand or to try and understand how to use it before you actually use it. I guess where ActiveCampaign certainly excels is that if you're already using a mail system, and most people will be, they'll be using MailChimp or GetResponse or Aweber, then ActiveCampaign is there is pretty much no learning curve, as you're quite aware, to actually replace what you're already doing with MailChimp. With ActiveCampaign.
Yeah, that's what really kind of attracted me about it, is that it's an easy transition. Like you said, if you go out and buy a hammer, that doesn't necessarily, you know how to use a hammer, but it doesn't mean you know how to build a house. So There's always going to be that learning curve on how you apply that knowledge. But I think wrapping your head around, you can get started easy by doing the stuff you're already familiar with.
Yeah.
And then you can bolt on more and more sequences and more automation as you get more comfortable with mapping out your business workflow and how you want it to look, and then implementing that in the tool.
Yep.
All right. So I'd love to move on to Fuzed now. So for those of people who aren't familiar with how you moved from the travel agency to being a SaaS app entrepreneur, why don't you just quickly tell us that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're about 2 years into me owning a travel agency and heavily embedded in a few communities online. I was enjoying the online space more and more. I'd started a podcast on multimedia marketing. I was obviously shooting a lot of video using Wistia, using Infusionsoft. And one of my friends that I'd been speaking to quite a bit at that point was Dan Norris, who we spoke about a little bit earlier. And so he was basically he'd allocated a year of his time and wages towards building a product called Informly, which is like a software as a service application. And he'd sort of gotten into the last month or so where he was basically running out of cash, and he needed to reallocate one of his developers. He had 2 developers working on the product. And so basically he had to let one of his developers go. And instead of just letting them go, he wanted to ensure that he found them more work and found them a place to work. And so he asked a few people online and shot me a Skype message on a Friday afternoon and said, I've got to let this guy go. Would you be interested in taking him? And at that point, I've got no sort of development background. I'd not even considered looking at development. I said yes. And I thought, well, number one, it's relatively cheap, under $1,000 a month, the cost of his salary for a full-time employee. Number two is we were building some websites for selective clients. I thought, even if I don't get him to develop something else, I can use him to help build these websites. So that was my fallback. And number three, I was intrigued with what you could do with Wistia and what you could do with Infusionsoft. And so on a Friday, I said yes. He started work on a Monday. I thought about what I'd get him to do over the weekend, and we decided that we wanted to connect Wistia and Infusionsoft. So one of the core features that Wistia allow you to do is that they allow you to track a user. So you can tag somebody watching a video with the email address. So if they click a link in your email that you've sent out, then Wistia will grab the email that it was sent to, and it'll sort of apply it to the player. And then it will track the view, any view that they watch of your video. So what I wanted to do was I said to our developer, I said, hey, what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to select a parameter. So if somebody watched, say, above 50% of this video, then I'd like to send them an email via Infusionsoft. And so he went off and he's worked out that we could connect it, and then it was working. I played around with it a little bit, and I decided, okay, well, let's build this in a way where I can ask some other friends if they want to use the system as well. And so we built in a user module into Fuzed, and that was great. That took another day. And then I started showing a couple of friends, and they're like, oh, this is fantastic. And then somebody said, can you do the exact same thing here, connect the platform to GoToWebinar, which is a webinar platform, and it works along the same parameters. So someone wanted to know when someone attended or didn't attend a webinar, and then they wanted to put them into different email sequences. And so we connected that. Within a month, we had paying users on board. And within 6 months, we were well and truly embedded in a few communities, including Infusionsoft and Entreport.
Yeah, that's a great story. So in that first weekend, was that this all like whiteboards and Post-it notes and you trying to figure out what you wanted to do? Or
It wasn't. Is
it really just you wanted something to solve your own problem? Yeah.
Yeah, it was solving my. I guess it was solving my problem. I don't have too many original thoughts. A lot of what I do is that I see, like I model like leaders very, very easily. I seem to be able to model, and I guess in most cases I would say that I can improve, or I can find points where I can actually do something better. Yeah. And there are some products in the marketplace that were already doing this, which I thought, well, this is really cool. I'd love to be able to do this. A guy named Jermaine Griggs who had built WordPress plugins to do this Wistia stuff, and another guy named Brad Martineau had a product called Plus This, and they were both doing it. And I thought, yeah, cool. I'd love to be able to do it. I love the concept. And so we went off and developed it. And I guess I believe we made it better.
Yeah, for sure. And I love how you kind of started with the platform and again, modeling successful people by reaching out to influencers and getting them on board so they get them talking about it as well. Because I think that the person you were referring to, GoToWebinar, was that Taki?
It was. Yeah. Yep.
So whenever you got Taki Moore and James Schramko on board, it's probably going to go pretty well for you.
Yeah, I think, and that I think the way that this is a whole nother conversation, but this goes down to how I guess I network online, and these are relationships that come about not from me just approaching them and saying, hey, I've got this, use it. I'd been nurturing these for pretty much my entire career online. So James was the first person that sort of attracted me into the online space, and I had invested 2 years into providing value and learning and implementing before I'd even asked him to do anything for me. And I didn't even have to ask him at that point because he was just, he knew me, he respected what I was doing, and he was happy to promote something that was going to benefit his listeners.
Yeah, for sure. And he's a genuine guy. And you're right, you add value before you ask for something. So now that you've got a few people using Fuzed at this point in the story, are you rolling out features, or are you just getting them to tell you what they need?
That's exactly right. So now it's 100% user driven. So every feature apart from that, in fact, I tell a lie, there was one other feature that I embedded into the platform because I wanted it, but every other feature has been driven by what the users want. So now we integrate with Shopify, of course, with ActiveCampaign, integrate with Google Calendar. We've got like a plugin for Chrome browser, some help desk systems, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've got quite a nice stable of integrations. At this point, we have slowed down in continuing to develop new features. We're enhancing the features we currently have. And at this point, I guess the main reason behind that is that we're providing tremendous value with our product, but I've seen another market which needs help. And so we've started working on another product in another space, which I believe we're trying to, I guess, interrupt and actually, revolutionize, I guess, as well.
Oh, I'm intrigued now. I suppose you're not going to share that with us at this point, though, are you?
Well, I can. We do have a landing page up for it. So I've been following along. Obviously, there's your listener will hopefully know about the platforms like Lead Pages,
yeah, for sure,
and Unbounce, which are landing page templates. So what they obviously do is that they provide well-designed landing pages so that you can, within a couple of minutes, you can have something up and you can be collecting emails, et cetera, et cetera. Well, one of the big things with the payment and with shopping carts is that there isn't really any product that allows you to have like a selection of simple landing, like layouts, like payment page layouts, where you can collect money from people really simply and easily. So it's a product we called Merge Cart, and we've just started developing this week, and we won't be due to open until somewhere in early 2015. But it's a space which I think really needs some innovation, and it really needs some simplification.
Cool, very cool. I look forward to seeing all that stuff. Just before we close off our interview here, so going back to Fuzed for a second, have there been any features that customers have asked for that were just a complete surprise to you and you didn't kind of see it coming?
Probably the big one for me was the need for it's probably our Chrome extension, which for a time was also a Gmail extension. So people want to be able to access, which kind of makes sense when you look at it. It's a very simple one. But basically, what it allows you to do is that when you're in Gmail, if you say you've got a message open in your inbox, this little extension just looks at the sender's name, the sender's email address, and it pulls in all their contact information from ActiveCampaign.
Very cool. And it also tells you what sequences and tags they have? Or?
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool,
Automation series, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a very simple one. And in theory, it's just another browser window that would be open. But a lot of people really, they asked for it for a long time before I actually implemented it. And so that was, I guess, surprising because for me, it does offer value. There's no doubt about it. But I didn't see that it offered a substantial amount of value, but it does.
Yeah, very cool. All right, Jake. Well, we might wrap it up there. So where can people find out more about FuzedApp and all the groovy stuff you can do with that?
Absolutely. So just head across to FuzedApp, FuzedApp.com.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Jake. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to having you back later and sharing a sequence with us.
Fantastic. Thanks, Barry. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jake. Really great interview with Jake there. I love his story of how he got started into the marketing automation space and into the entrepreneurial world. He's a really nice guy. I just saw him recently at an event down in Sydney where he gave a presentation on a sales funnel for James Schramko. Really, really interesting stuff. As always, you can find the show notes over at theactivemarketer.com website. You can find the show notes for this particular episode at theactivemarketer.com/Jake. And just before we go, this is a new podcast, and I'm trying to get the message of marketing automation out in front of as many people as possible because I think it's a powerful tool for growing your business. I really appreciate it if you could share this podcast with someone who you think will find it useful. Until next week, you can find all the show notes and more blog posts over at theactivemarketer.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Active Marketer Podcast. You can find the show notes and all the latest marketing automation news over at theactivemarketer.com.